Did you see the EU wants to scan all private messages? EU's push to mass scan private messages on WhatsApp and Signal. EU member states to vote on controversial Chat Control 2 proposals to scan communications for child sex abuse material. Well, obviously that's what they'd say they're looking for. That's always how censorship gets justified, or like surveillance, I guess, in this case. Under the proposed legislation, photos, videos, and URLs sent on popular apps such as WhatsApp and Signal would be scanned by an artificial intelligence-powered algorithm against a government database of known abuse material. Jesus. Oh, this is from 2024? Oh. Well, ban the person who linked it then. What was the result of the vote? I see discussion of this as resurfacing. Did the vote previously fail and they're considering it again? They're trying to push it through again? Okay, yeah, that's what's going on then. So it failed previously, and now they're going for another. Run. FightChatControl.eu. 3 member states opposing, 15 member states supporting. Jesus. They've been trying this for as long as I can remember. They will never stop. Yeah, I mean, the purpose of a bureaucracy is to reinforce a bureaucracy, right? Like eventually, like when a nation has the ability to do something like this, it will push relentlessly for it because it increases its own power. It's not really a matter of whether it's needed. It's just a matter of time. Every state eventually will do this. The EU is an actual nanny state, so yeah, of course they're going to do it. They're doing it here too, buddy. They're pushing for the exact same goddamn shit here. The US already has it? Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I figured Subs and Soda. Man, it is a depressing fucking day for news. This is the real demonic shit too. It's not just the like, well, DC takeover, federal takeover. There's a lot of like really nefarious, sinister underlying institutional shit. And it feels like not only is nothing being done about it, but there's no meaningful opposition because, again, there is no pro-free speech movement in the United States or in the Western world. There is no meaningful political movement that believes in freedom of speech. It does not exist. The RFK Jr. stuff as well. The firing of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Yeah, it's just a lot of stuff where it's like, I can't help but think that it's too nuanced of a topic for the general public. Maybe. Is there any reason it's all happening now, do you think? Yeah, I think that the experiment might be getting near the end. It might be getting near its end. And it's possible that there's going to be a larger crackdown now because the powers that be are aware that we're kind of like about to run out the clock on social stability that's built on a collective consensus, democratic mandate, and an adherence to the social contract. Like, for a long time now, we have been able to maintain social order off the promise that things are getting better, right? Like, that's how China's been doing it, you know? You historically, the way governments have maintained social order is either through threat of force or the promise of, like, mutual protection, right? Usually both, you know, like a king obviously rules through force, but at the same time, there's like, well, the king manages the kingdom and protects it and so on, you know. Only recently has social order been upheld on the prospect of like constant progress and betterment. Does that make sense? Like, if you go back to the 1400s or whatever, or fuck the 600s, the average peasant is not orderly and socially productive because they believe the world will be a better place when they die than when they were born. That idea wasn't really widely held. You had your plot of land, you had your job, you had your mission, you had your responsibilities, you have your family, and you live, and that's your goal. Your goal is to live as long as you can and do the best you can, and, you know, after that, you pass it to the next generation. And more recently, since the Industrial Revolution, nowadays, everybody within their lifetime has seen this like explosive growth in technological and social progress. The world moves very quickly now, but because it moves quickly, it moves out from under our feet. People no longer believe that life can remain stable and steady. You can't be born, learn a trade, and then just do that trade your whole life and then die in the same house that you were born in that was left to you by your parents. That stability doesn't exist anymore. It's not like the unchanging countryside. It used to be there were areas that were left more or less unchanged for centuries. Like entire villages, communities of people could live and die and live and die and live and die a dozen generations in a row, and the whole area being fundamentally the same the entire time. But now, totally impossible. The whole world around, everything everywhere is changing so quickly. So if we don't have that prospect of stability, if we don't have that idea of like, well, my job is to hold on to this little plot of land with this little family and this little house and keep it all together, now that that's not possible, what unites us? What allows people to believe in the social contract to the point where they're willing to be productive and industrious and law-abiding and so on? And my belief is that since the Industrial Revolution, which is when things really kicked off, what people have been bound together by is the belief in progress. Not just progressives, mind you, but conservatives too. Conservatives nowadays, and I'm including fascists in this, fascists believe in progress, right? It's just the kind of progress they want is bad. Conservatives believe in progress. It's just the kind of progress they want is bad. They believe in changing the world, This is unique. Before the Industrial Revolution, it just wasn't that common, or maybe before the Enlightenment. You can set the bar wherever you want, but the idea is that the world is fluid and transient and alterable, and they want to grab the steering wheel of the world and turn it in a direction that favors them. They want to alter the world they see, Everyone believes this now. To varying extents, they want to make things better, or at least they think they do. And I think we're running out the end of this experiment. Because for the past 250 or so years, for the most part, I think there's been a collective understanding, even in the worst times, right? Even with the Spanish flu, World War I, World War II, there's been a narrative that there are bad things, but through goodness, you can overcome them. Even with the Great Depression, even in times where life was wretched and miserable for a lot of people, we had that narrative. And I'm not saying the narrative was always consistent. It wavered a lot, I imagine. But I do think there was that narrative. And I think it's been all over the world, in India, in China, in places that are less materially developed. They have this narrative, maybe even more so. A lot of their immigrants come to the United States. They're very industrious. They're very productive because they believe earnestly in the idea that hard work can earn you a better living. And we might be running that out. We might be reaching a point, maybe, at least where it feels this way, where it feels like the line is broken. And technological progress can happen, but it's not going to improve your life. Technological progress improving your life is a 20th century thing. Now, you just get different shaped labubus. Social progress is done. We peaked in 2015 or something. I don't know. The idea of transformative social change as a concept is done. Even fascists, theoretically the most aggressive status quo breakers of our time, the fascist parties all across the West have no vision for changing the world. In fact, fascists everywhere don't. Nobody believes in changing the world anymore, possibly because the complexities of the global economy make it impossible to change things without just causing mass famine. Look what happens in Syria, The Syrian revolution takes place. What changes fundamentally, The new leadership engages in the same nation-building projects that every other developing country engages in. The fascist governments, the fascist parties all across the West are just like edgy 4chan trolls with access to a few more levers. You have like incredibly powerful people, but Xi Jinping ultimately is still a servant to the global economy in many ways. Likewise with Modi in India. You have people who like theoretically could be these great men, but they're not. Even Vladimir Putin, he starts the big land war in Europe, the greatest in nearly a century, and what comes of it? an almost immediate stalemate and a continuation of pre-existing social trends. Nobody has the ability to grab the wheels and wrench them in any direction anymore because there's so much inertia. There are too many people, too much money, too many resources, and everything is too decentralized for anybody or any organization to really truly wrench the wheel anymore. The inertia is what's driving us forward, and the inertia is driving us in a bad direction. A direction where we could theoretically have everything, but we don't, and we can't do anything about it. And I think that between that and the social instability that's basically guaranteed as climate change continues to take over, speaking of inertia, I think that maybe a lot of Western governments, not just Western, but Western governments, are reading the writing on the wall, and they're going, we are not going to be able to maintain social order via mutual consensus anymore. It's just not going to be possible. Like, the world will not allow, maybe sometime in the indefinite future, but in the near future, we will reach a point where widespread distrust, antipathy, cultural stagnation, and a lack of hope in the ability for things to get better, all of these things are going to compound to a point where nobody will be willing to work. Nobody will be willing to follow the law. Nobody will be willing to, as a matter of consensus, participate in the betterment of the world. And when that day happens, the government will need to be ready to rein in the population. The government will need to establish the infrastructure that allows it to maintain control in situations where it might not otherwise be able to. I think that historically the way people have done this has been through transformative social change, or the promise of transformative social change. FDR with the New Deal, Adolf Hitler in the 1930s, or Mussolini in the 1920s, you know? You have big leaders with big promises and big ideas. But the world was smaller back then, and people actually could wrench the wheel of history. Mussolini and Hitler could fundamentally change the direction the country was moving in. But guys, I'm going to be real with you. I don't know if Donald Trump is fundamentally changing the direction that this country is moving in. I feel like he's hastening a bunch of processes. But regulatory capture and the submission of federal power to corporate interests and irrationally combative foreign policy done to excite or exacerbate national tension with the interest of using it to like perpetuate military proliferation, and like the proflagration of war in the Middle East, all of these things were already happening. Like, we made an enemy out of China because after the Cold War ended, we needed some kind of big bad to justify continued military spending. We already supported Israel and what they were doing in Gaza. And while Trump is certainly worse for it than Biden ever was or ever could be, regulatory capture has been a thing for decades. It's been worsening rapidly. Under Obama, it worsened considerably. You know, the extent to which, well, every single fucking government official is some kind of business magnate. Trump hasn't really wrenched the wheel in a new direction. If anything, Trump has just, as the president, taken his hands off the wheel and allowed history to continue in the direction that it was already moving. Look at the Labour Party in Britain, right? The Labour Party in Britain seems to have done basically nothing other than signpost and defend a law passed by the Tories pertaining to internet censorship, and has gotten militantly transphobic, seemingly for no reason other than to appease J.K. Rowling. But again, it's just momentum. The real black pill is that there can only be momentum now, that there are just too many people, too much money, and too many economic relationships in the world for anyone or any organization to do anything transformative anymore, and that all we can really do is like lightly guide the careening mega freighters that we all live on to try to avert the worst possible outcomes, like boats that are guided in their path almost entirely by the flow of a river, but you can use the rudder to kind of like avoid the biggest rocks. It kind of all goes back to what you said in your last big nihilism rant. Everything is just a pale copy of what it used to be. Yeah, like liberal fascism, you know? The fascists of yesteryear were largely military veterans with transformative ideas that well, I can't say single-handedly, but through a great deal of effort, broke the societies they live in. They were bold, they were aggressive, and they took a lot of risks. And they, for a brief time, as a consequence of those risks, ran the countries that they owned, you know? Then they died in bunkers, but, you know. Um, but today's fascists are just internet trolls, you know? They're lay epic memers. So, like, give up? Don't be a pussy. Engage with theory without you can't is this you're reading a book and you reach the end of act 2 and Luke Skywalker loses his hand and falls down the big tube and you're like, this fucking sucks, what am I supposed to do, watch more? I can't watch Return of the Jedi. What is it going to be, more of this? Aren't you the one saying it's so over? No, that's what you're hearing because you're weak. The theory is that we cannot affect meaningful change, though. Yeah, well, if you're on a boat that's being steered by the course of the river, not so much the rudder, what happens eventually? You go over the waterfall. I don't think what we're in right now is a permanent state of affairs, because eventually, if you're steering a sinking ship, the ship does sink. And what you do when you're on the sinking ship matters. Maybe nothing you do with regards to steering it prevents it from sinking, but you can be the motherfucker who was smart enough to put the life vest on. You know, it's not all hopeless. It's just that it does kind of feel like in the current macroeconomic global system, there are a bunch of very weighted incentives in place that just make it difficult to. I feel like if Bernie Sanders had won the presidency back in 2016, things wouldn't have changed that much. Like, he would have presided over a slightly improved and better economy, and we might have coasted that wave for a bit, but inevitably the grievance politics and corporate control of right-wing media would have inevitably produced much similar outcomes. It might not have been Trump, it could have been Ted Cruz, I don't know. But that wouldn't have made that it was it wouldn't have meant that it was pointless, right? It just would have added to the momentum. He might have done what FDR did and revitalized the system for a few years or decades. See, I disagree, because I think that I think FDR was president in an era where people could do things. I don't think momentum, because that was before global trade. For me, that is the big momentum driver, because it used to be that if you were building something, it was probably with steel from your country. If you were eating something, it was food grown in your country. As a leader in a nation, you had the ability to make big decisions about what happened to your economy and what happened to your people and your productive processes, because it was much more local. But nowadays, because of the globalized economy, you know, everything is so complicated and interwoven that even national leaders are powerless in the face of these ridiculously nuanced and complicated and multivariable changes. You can, even tiny little adjustments can create catastrophically negative outcomes in the long run, and there's so much power and it's so decentralized. So it's not just that FDR was goated with the sauce when it came to dealing with the country, because he was in a lot of respects. But it's also that, like, I fundamentally I don't think that the world can be steered in the same way nowadays. Or you know what? I'll put it this way. Chat, think about it. Post-globalized economy, can you think of a single political leader in any country that had the kind of, like, national mandate change power that Mussolini, Hitler, FDR, even Churchill did? Post-globalized economy. So Mao, of course, you go into the 1960s and such, but China didn't have a globalized economy after that. Burkina Faso guy, not even close. Lula da Silva, not even close. Transformative to Brazil the same way FDR was to America? Absolutely not. He lifted millions out of poverty? Yeah, by presiding over the industrialization and, like, welfare state of Brazil. That's not the same thing. So did Deng. So did Xi Jinping. But that's not transformative in the same way. I think Obama was kind of close to the mandate. No, you're not understanding. You don't understand what world leaders used to be like. You don't understand. Leaders, kings, emperors, and for a time, presidents used to single-handedly grab their countries and wrench them in a new direction. They were titans who stood over history, still, mind you, subject to historical forces, not great men in the great man theory sense, but by today's standards, modern politicians are feeble bureaucrats, weak, inept, uncertain. This is exactly my point. There are none. Here, wait, I'm just going to start muting people for an hour because I specifically said after global trade. After global trade. That's my argument. Once global trade, the modern globalized economy became a thing, these leaders stopped existing. You understand? That's the point. Fidel Castro is the only one I can think of. You fucking moron. You fucking idiot. Cuba was not participating in the global economy back in the 1960s. The most they did post... Oh my God. Batista was engaged in like direct, mutually beneficial economic relations with America, and Cuba traded extensively with the Soviet Union, but that was not the global economy. Thatcher, Reagan? No, not even close. Not even remotely close. Thatcher and Reagan did nothing but hasten the corporate capture of their respective countries. Neoconservatism was the ultimate capitulation to pre-existing material forces. Our guy's just saying names now. I should ban for a day is what I should do. I really do try. Sometimes when I'm having conversations like this, I really am trying to flesh out answers because it helps further my understanding. And the retards who just pitch any name they can think of actually like do deteriorate the conversation. Like they actually are worsening it, you know? I honestly can't think of anyone. I think your theory might be solid. It's like capturing every national leader in a big spider web, you know? It makes it impossible to move without moving other people, and everyone else is pulling against you whenever you do something that doesn't favor their interests. I don't know. Anyway, the way things are structured right now, I do feel like we're on a sinking ship. And likewise, I do feel like inertia guides national decision-making far more than the whims of any leader. Presumably, when this whole thing gets upended, like whatever comes next will not be so inertia-driven. If everything's just inertial, there's nothing to stop us from crashing into a wall. I think you have to consider those leaders all came after a period of crisis, so there just hasn't been a chance since then. I disagree. There have been crises all around the world. Big, you know, there have been poverty and natural disasters. I don't think that it gets engaged with in the same way. Your argument works very well to the Soviet Union too and its leaders. I think so, yeah. Do you think the fact that modern states and bureaucracies are so massive that it's not modern states and bureaucracies being massive. It's the global economy. It's like a macroeconomic version of how socialism couldn't take root in Latin America because we kept cooing it, you know? Nowadays, the only way to get anything is to participate in a gigantic globalized system of trade. It doesn't matter if your country is wealthy or poor. Everyone is caught in it. It didn't used to be like that. It used to be most countries just did their own thing. Up until like a half a century ago, a significant portion, well, more like 60 or 70 years ago, a significant portion of the world, like in a country, it was like, what's their deal? They do their own thing, and maybe they trade with their neighbors. But nowadays, even the poorest countries, even countries like fucking Zambia or Bangladesh, you know, or Sri Lanka, are caught up in global trade. They have ports that take on mega freighters. You know, it's not like their people are any wealthier. It's just like this is the way the world works now. And what happens if you're a leader of a poor country and you want to single-handedly grab the wheel of change and spin it in a new direction? Well, congratulations, motherfucker. All the corporations that have like ties to your company, both local and foreign, or sorry, your country, local and foreign, they don't want you to do that shit. It's not even a matter of getting you cooed. It's also like you can't make these changes without food prices increasing by 17%. Everything has been streamlined to the point where like you live on a razor's edge of profitability, keeping your people from starvation. And your people are aware of that. So if you do anything that marginally raises food prices, if you do anything that cuts you off from the system of international dependencies, what do you do? What do you do then? Well, you're going to suffer for it politically. Yeah, and it all gets swallowed by the noise. You don't get to change anything. Like, man, Xi Jinping is an incredibly powerful person. But what does he do? Like, what does he actually do? It seems like the main thing that I credit him for is keeping the reins on the relationship between the capital class in China and the global economy. Like, the joke is literally does nothing. China does nothing, comma, wins. That's literally the joke with China. Do you think the only way to break this cycle is total global economic collapse? I mean, climate change is going to pretty much guarantee that at some point soon. This is one of the reasons why I talk about rice and beans so much. You know, I'm kind of like, I'm trying to think of a way to express in a mimetic and memorable way my belief that it is responsible and good and morally virtuous and so on, to try to find the ways to exist, even, how do you put it, even in a world where all of these interconnected systems start to break down and fail. It's not just about being poor. Like, you could be middle class or whatever, and one day it just might. That isn't a systemic solution, though. I don't think there's a systemic solution. That might be my black pill. I don't think there's any way to keep the ship from sinking. I think you need to position yourself so that when it sinks, you don't die. And then maybe after that, if we're lucky, we get to make something better. I want to know what you think the collapse looks like. All I get is LARPy anarchism or corpo dystopia from a shitty YA novel. I could fathom a guess. Governments get more so governments all across the world get increasingly unpopular. Their decision making seems less and less designed to appeal to the interests of a political constituency in their own countries, and more to serve a broader set of interests about maintaining stability and control, even if it's for reasons nobody understands. A good example of this would be surveillance or Israel, things that are increasingly unpopular, but governments keep forcing through anyway. The reason they're doing this has nothing to do with getting reelected or, ensuring a popular mandate, but rather making sure their basic economic and social infrastructure is upheld, even if it's unpopular. Palantir AI surveillance, snooping in your phones, satellites looking at you from above. Or, in the case of Israel, continued positive relationships with arms suppliers. After all, it would be very destabilizing if the US government started to get a bad relationship with companies like Northrop Grumman or Lockheed Martin, wouldn't it? These companies have more power than most governments. It would probably be in the interest of the Western world to make sure they stay on good terms with them, which is probably why countries like the UK and Germany, despite not being personally involved very much with Israel, like in a literal sense or in a financial sense, are very, very, very insistent on signaling how supportive they are of Israel, because they really don't want to end up on the wrong side of a world order where the companies that produce all the world's most powerful weapons aren't on their side. Additionally, climate change makes certain trade routes globally more and more unfeasible and makes more and more of the world's land arid. First, animal agriculture goes. It gets more expensive, more exclusionary, but because the corporate media is unwilling to acknowledge the real reason for it and governments are incentivized to lie, people will interpret it as a temporary or ephemeral pricing fluctuation, as opposed to like the existential collapse of factory farming and animal agriculture. So you have two constrictions then, a reduction in viable global trade for essentials like food, and also less and less arable land in the United States needing to be directed more and more towards human sustenance. The increasing cost of all of these things is going to make certain types of technologies like lab-grown meat simultaneously more appealing but also more unattainable. People will think it's even more wasteful and more highfalutin sci-fi bullshit to invest time and money into a hypothetical sci-fi future tech that they imagine will only further increase prices, when their proposed solution would simply be, why don't we just farm cattle even more, or reduce the quality of the meat that's being produced. After all, if beef is getting more expensive, surely there are some regulations that can be cut, some subsidies that can be put into place to maintain this critical element of our culture, the ability to eat 15 hamburgers a day. So you can expect regulations to come down, which serves the dual interest of appeasing the population with cheaper meat and also serving corporate interests by allowing them to sell to a wider audience. They're probably going to do the same thing for a lot of basic subsistence needs. You can expect that for meat, other kinds of food, water, etc. Meanwhile, climate refugees, which will initially be at their worst in probably Southeast Asia, parts of Africa that are getting too arid to live in, and Central America, are going to start to spread outward into countries that have more resources. So you can expect a resurgence of climate refugees down at the southern border. Initially, Mexico will try to absorb the weight of them, but they will fail to. Turkey eventually, inevitably, will buckle under the weight of its migrant population. It already has millions of migrants, millions more will be added, and Turkey will have to decide whether or not to allow them to flow through or to kill them at the entrance points to the country. I imagine they'll choose the latter based on the way they've been talking about unleashing the existing horde of migrants they're keeping within their country on Central and Western Europe, which they would, of course, not appreciate. So you have increasing mass surveillance, you have increasing government deferences to corporations, to subsidies, to deregulation. You have increasing unpopularity. No political leader seems to be willing or able to step up and address these crises. And the honest truth behind that is that there's no way to actually address these crises. It's possible, maybe, for a popular progressive leader to plant their feet down and go like, here's what we're going to do and make things a bit better, but they will not be able to make things better enough. So they will also become unpopular, and in their unpopularity, they will be blamed, their ideology will be blamed, and the next guy will be conservative, and we'll cycle back and forth. These problems will continue to worsen, presumably for as long as climate change continues to worsen or a sustainable solution is found. I don't know what that sustainable solution would look like. It really depends on how quickly governments act, but it seems like the only way we round about this is by eventually reaching a peak point to our global temperature, and that would mean a massive reduction in the global combustion and contribution of greenhouse gases. And that would mean that enough economic damage would have to be done that something along the lines of 60 to 80% of our planet's productive capabilities are shut off or destroyed. Hopefully shut off, likely in some cases destroyed, as people engage in resource wars over water in the Middle East, or arable land, as they're currently doing right now in Ukraine, by the way. That's a big part of it. It's not just natural resources or nationalism, it's also arable land. You can expect to see plenty of that in Africa. There will be plenty of that as well in Southeast Asia, as more and more people are forced to flee from the extremely populated and very low sea level coastal areas and move inland, flooding arable farmland with a 100 million strong climate refugee wave that will make it impossible to actually farm on that land as it's quickly redeveloped with, refugee settlement housing so large you can see it from space. Okay, but what else? Well, I can keep rambling if you want, but I'm trying to give you like a general. I think the reason why they're doubling down on the surveillance is because they understand that in a world like what I'm describing, there's no way to maintain social order or cohesion without doing some Orwellian shit. But what comes after? Well, I'm not really like a doom and gloom apocalypse kind of guy personally, so I think that all this is really the setup. Eventually, we will settle on some kind of a sustainable point. There will be some kind of leveling off period, and the world will be, for most people, much, much worse than it was before. Like, the world will be hotter, the weather will be more intemperate, resources will be scarcer, communities will be forced to be more local because global trade really was pretty much entirely sustained on economic growth and cheap fuel. Which we won't have anymore, at least not in the same way that we used to. So, the population will probably be a lot lower, either because a lot of people have died due to heat waves or starvation, or because people are just populating less, as people feel uncomfortable having children in a world that they don't know will still exist a decade from now. But eventually, I do think the population will level out. And my hope is that in a much warmer world, in a much more ecologically barren world, it will be incentivized for us to be a little bit more conscientious with our remaining resources. You know, like it's easy to hunt the buffalo to extinction when you land in the Americas and there's a million billion buffalo. It's easy to be careless with your water usage when you look at the Colorado River and it's infinite in its scope. But after it's not, once you know that all of this is finite and can be taken away, I think that there are it's much more likely you're conscientious with its use. After all, we did used to be much worse to the environment than we are today. We used to be a lot more reckless, chopping down all the redwoods and stuff, old growth forests. Now that we have a better understanding of ecological sustainability, we are better than we used to be. People discount that. So yeah, we'll see. Oh, and then the world will presumably be too warm for quite a long time, like quite a long time. The expansion of the Sahara will probably continue for thousands and thousands of years. I don't really know, what would have to change, how long it would take for the carbon sinks in on Earth's surface to start to really scrub the atmosphere. But it would happen eventually. Like not within our lifetimes, not even close.